So, New Japan's G1 Climax 32 is coming up this July 16th. It's time to put down some predictions. First, a few words on my methodology here. I'm going to be focusing on who's going to win their blocks, right? Because that's ultimately what's important when it comes to this tournament. I'm also going to be thinking about who's going to be getting champion shots between now and the Tokyo Dome, which means basically pinning Jay White. We're also going to be thinking about who's going to challenge for that briefcase between now and the Tokyo Dome as well, as in who's going to beat the winner. It's impossible to get every night right when it comes to predicting the G1, but you can get the right ideas and the right storylines if you really think things through. The most important thing to do when you come up with your predictions for the G1 is to look at the last two nights, right? August 16th and August 14th, right? Usually it just would be the one night I would look at, but this year with 4 blocks and so many competitors, you really have to look at the last 2 nights, and that's what I'm really going to be focusing on. I would say the biggest trap that a newcomer to the G1 who's interested in making some predictions could fall into would be to just look at the contenders and think, okay, I want these people to win and these people to lose, so those are my picks, right? You've really got to zero in on the schedule and who's facing who at what time. A good example of this is what's going on with Lance Archer. You might be tempted to have the idea of seeing Lance Archer beat Okada and then having Okada win his block and win the whole tournament. If that were to happen, you could imagine some interesting things happening thereafter, right? Lance could challenge Okada for the G1 briefcase on Dynamite, right? And wouldn't that be pretty cool? Probably would pop a rating, right? But the thing is, that match is happening on the last day. And unless you think Lance is going to win the entire A block, he's not going to win that match. So that's what I mean when I say you gotta look at the schedule when you think about this stuff. With all that said, let's start looking at these blocks. So okay, let's look at the A block. Kazuchika Okada, Toru Yano, Jonah, Lance Archer, Tom Lawler, Jeff Cobb, and Bad Luck Fale. So I would say the major players in this block are obviously Kazuchika Okada, Lance Archer, and Jeff Cobb, with some role for Tom Lawler as well, and Toru Yano, of course, spoiling things along the way. Now, here's how I think this is going to go down. So, our main contenders are going to be Cobb and Okada, and I think the first big surprise of the G1 is actually going to come from the July 16th show with Kazuchika Okada against Jeff Cobb, opening night, and I expect Jeff Cobb to win, right? So Okada is going to have a tough G1 to start things out, right, with a big loss to the man he beat for his block last year, right? So Cobb is going to get that win over Okada, right? And from there, Okada will run through the other people in the block, right, and, go through everyone else until we get to the last day. Now, like I said, we want to look at what the matches are for the last 2 days very carefully. So one thing to note is that in the A block, second last day, it's Tom Lawler versus Jeff Cobb, and this is actually Jeff Cobb's last match of the tournament, right? So what that means is that Jeff Cobb can essentially come up short on the day before, right? So he can be eliminated the day before. And I think that's just what Tom Lawler is going to do to him, right? Because if Jeff Cobb goes down to Tom Lawler then, right, and if he loses earlier to someone like Yano, or, in my opinion, more likely Lance Archer, right, but if he loses to either of them, then he'd be held to 8 points, right, and he'd have a tiebreaker over Okada, right, but he wouldn't be able to get any more points because he doesn't have a match on the last day, right? So I see that as a big story for Jeff Cobb there, with Tom Lawler essentially spoiling his tournament. Then you have Kazuchika Okada versus Lance Archer as your final match on the last day, right? Where Lance Archer can be at 6 points, right, and ready to jump to 8, and Okada, of course, ready to beat Lance Archer and take 10 and take his entire block, right? So, as I said earlier, I don't expect Lance Archer to win his block, right? So I expect Okada to win there and win the entire A block, right? So it'll be everything to play for, but that final match, Lance Archer will go down to the Rainmaker, and the Rainmaker will take the A block. Incidentally, under this scenario, Cobb would also be able to challenge Okada for the briefcase later on down the road. So, Cobb wouldn't leave with nothing. Then you have B block, which is probably the hardest block to predict in this tournament. You've got Jay White in there, you've got Tomohiro Ishii, Taichi and Tama Tonga and Sonata and Great-O-Khan, all credible contenders in there. And then, of course, you've got Chase Owens. So the interesting thing about this block is not just who's going to win it, but, of course, who's also going to pin Jay White, right? So that makes things very interesting indeed. So let's start by talking about who's going to win it, who is, of course, not going to be Jay White, because I'm expecting quite the messy set of results there, with, the B block points before the finals having 4 people at 6. Taichi, Ishii, Sonata, and Jay White, all at 6. Now, this could really go in any of these directions, right? I could totally imagine Taichi winning it. I could totally imagine Sonata winning it. I can even imagine Ishii winning it, though I think that one is a long shot. But the big matches at the end for that block are Tomohiro Ishii versus Sonata and Tama Tonga versus Jay White, right? Taichi's last match is versus the Great-O-Khan on the second last day, so I think that Taichi, he might be in there in some sort of mathematical thing. Like, I sort of can imagine him maybe having a tiebreaker over Jay White, right, and everything like that, but I don't think he's going to be well poised to win the block. Now, let's first talk about that first match, Jay White versus Tama Tonga. Now, I don't see things going well for Tama Tonga in this particular block. As you can see on my predictions there, I've got 0 points for the guy in his performance there, right? So I don't see him doing well. I mean, maybe he'll net a win over Chase or Great-O-Khan or something like that, but I don't know. I don't really see it. The reason I'm being so harsh with him, though, isn't because I think he's bad or whatnot. It's because I think he is going to be the one to get the big win over Jay White on that last day and break Jay White's tournament dreams, right? And also, by the way, set up a nice title defense for himself, right? So I expect, Jay White, he's going to come in there, he's going to hold a tiebreaker over Ishii, and, you'll have a scenario where, if Jay White wins this match, he'll possibly win the entire block, right? That kind of storyline. But then, of course, Tama Tonga upsets him, right? Takes away that possibility, and we have an instant feud between Tama Tonga and Jay White. Ties into the Bullet Club stuff nicely, and, well, there you go. So that's what I think is going to go down with Jay White. That leaves us with Sonata and Ishii, right? And, again, this one, I don't know. It could go either way, right? I could totally see the going into either direction there. But I think ultimately, because of the way New Japan is, I think that, they like Sonata. They wanted to give him the U.S. title before he got injured. And so I think he will beat Ishii, and it'll be a great match, and he'll go on to the semifinals as the winners of the B block. I can also imagine a scenario where you basically switch Sonata's name for Great-O-Khan, but I love the Great-O-Khan. I think he's the best. He's also a hero. But, of course, I think it's also maybe a bit too early for him. Chase, meanwhile, I expect him to be a pin eater in his block, and honestly, probably shouldn't even be in the G1, let's be honest. C block, I think, is relatively straightforward, right? You've got Naito and Zack Sabre Jr. as the clear favorites, and then you've got Kenta, Tanahashi, Goto as the ones below that. Probably Goto in a lower tier than that. Goto is not going to win. Come on, guys. Aaron Hanare is in there as well, and of course, this guy Evil also has to be here to ruin our G1s. But nevertheless, here's what I'm thinking is going to happen. First of all, Naito and ZSG, clear favorites there. And surprise, surprise, the final match of the C block is looking like Naito versus Zack Sabre Jr. And I expect that to be the one that decides it all in a pretty straightforward fashion. You will notice that Tanahashi's last match is on August 14th, and I think, Tanahashi only got 8 points last year, right? And that was with, of course, the normal blocks. This year, I hope he gets 6, right? I don't expect him to do much better than that, and I do expect him, to end with 6 points, technically tied with the leaders, but no more matches, so therefore, very sad times for Tanahashi. The interesting match here is Goto versus Evil, right? So I expect that Evil is going to be at 6 points through his cheating bullshit that he'll do through the entire tournament, right? And that Goto will not win the tournament, but he will have the honor of making sure that Evil doesn't steal anything from anyone else, right? So you could have a scenario very easily where Evil beats Naito during the course of the tournament and has the tiebreaker over him, right? And so, you have that thing going where, if Naito wins, Evil has a tiebreaker and they, Evil takes the block, but I don't expect that to happen. I expect a straightforward winner-take-all Naito versus Zack Sabre Jr. C block final. Now, for that match, again, this is another one. Could go either way. Naito is Naito, and everything like that. And honestly, I could easily change this in a heartbeat here, as I'll talk a little bit more about later. But for now, I think Zack won the New Japan Cup. This is Zack Sabre Jr.'s year, and I'm putting him down as the winner of the C block. Then finally, you have the D block: El Phantasmo, David Finlay, Yoshihashi, Will Ospreay, Shingo Takagi, Juice Robinson, and Yujiro Takahashi. Another guy who probably should not be here. But nevertheless, I think this one's a pretty straightforward two-person block with Will Ospreay and Shingo. But before we talk about that part, let's talk about the schedule for this, right? Because the D block final is actually Will Ospreay versus Juice Robinson and Shingo Takagi versus El Phantasmo, right? And if you go way back to the beginning, right, you'll see that Will Ospreay versus Shingo actually happens relatively early. In fact, hang on, where is that match? Right, I think it's somewhere. Ospreay versus Phantasmo, Ospreay versus Yujiro, Finlay. Yeah, August 6th is when Shingo versus Will Ospreay occurs, and I think that's probably going to be the most important match of the D block, right? Considering, well, who else is there, right? So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking Shingo will win that match, right? And that he will go into the D block finals with a tiebreaker over Ospreay, who, meanwhile, I think Ospreay will go 8 points, right? No losses to anyone else other than Shingo, right? So just one blot on his record. So what that would mean for these two matches is that if Shingo beats El Phantasmo, right, he goes to 8 and ties with Ospreay, right? And then, of course, he has the tiebreaker over Will Ospreay, and he takes the block, unless Will Ospreay defeats Juice Robinson. And here, we have another perfect spot for a nice little upset there, right? Because if Juice Robinson beats Will Ospreay, right, he can spoil his tournament, right? And that will tie nicely in with the drama that's currently surrounding the U.S. title, right? Which, of course, Ospreay is the rightful champion, but Juice is holding the belt and not giving it back, right? So that seems like the straightforward scenario there, right? So that's what I would expect to happen on the D block finals, right? So again, Shingo defeats El Phantasmo, gets into a tie with Will Ospreay, right, which he has the tiebreaker, and then Juice goes ahead and beats Ospreay, knocks Ospreay out of the tournament, and leaves Shingo with the D Block Championship. And that is what I think is going to happen there. So to review, A Block, Okada, B Block, Sanada, C Block, ZSJ, and then the D Block, Shingo. Now, New Japan hasn't made it very easy on us because they haven't told us which block winner will face which block winner, right? So we have no idea if A Block is supposed to fight B Block or C Block or D Block or whatever. It seems like they're going to announce that once they have all the winners in question. So, in spite of that, though, I think that given my predictions thus far, it would make the most sense to have it so that A fights B, right? So you have Okada versus Sanada as your first semi-finalist match, right? They have their history together where Okada wins most of the matches, but Sanada always, pushes him to the limit, and they always have good matches against one another. So, Okada versus Sanada, that would be a nice, straightforward, not block final, semi-final, whatever they want to call it. Right, and then Zack Sabre Jr. against Shingo, another match with a lot of history. Of course, last G1, Zack tapped out Shingo, and maybe he'll do that again. So that's the matchups I'm expecting: Okada, Sanada, Zack Sabre Jr. against Shingo. Right, so those both would be excellent matches. Right, so that's what I expect. Now, who's going to come out of each? Well, I expect Okada to beat Sanada. Right, and on the Zack Sabre Jr. and Shingo side, we just had Okada versus Zack Sabre Jr. a few months ago. So I would honestly have to say Shingo, right? Because, it's obviously Okada and Shingo have faced each other as well, but that's a fresher match, and I think it would be the better G1 Climax final. And I think New Japan really wants a nice, hard-hitting, epic G1 final this time, especially after what happened to Ibushi in G1 Climax 31. So I would expect your finals on Thursday, August 18th to be Shingo Takagi against Kazuchika Okada. And my pick for the winner of the G1 Climax, well, it's got to be Kazuchika Okada. I feel that, he just lost the title before the G1, right? And, it was a very one-sided match against Jay White where the story basically was that Okada had stagnated and was too predictable, too easy for Jay to stay sort of 2 steps ahead of, right? And I feel that the G1 will be a perfect opportunity for him to sort of try to get out of that rut and to start becoming a newer, even more powerful Okada, right? And I think that the storyline going into the Tokyo Dome would be really interesting, right? It would be a rematch against those two, and it would be sort of the narrative of, is Okada able to get himself to the next level and reach Jay again and defeat Jay and avenge his loss, right? Can he become something even greater than the old Rainmaker, right? So it would be a way for Okada to sort of, I feel, go to an even higher level, because Switchblade defeated the Rainmaker, and that was decisive, right? Almost no cheating, right? Straightforward, move for move. It wasn't close, right? Jay had so much offense in that match in Dominion that I feel it's the stage is set for the Rainmaker to become something even more than the Rainmaker. So that is what I would predict for the G1, right? Okada takes it all and goes on to the Tokyo Dome to face Jay White. Thanks so much for watching. Leave a comment below if you have your own predictions or want to talk about anything I've just said.